Yo, hello. Good Saturday evening, everybody. Hello, we are here for the Erudition Network late night Saturday history wrap up. Why do we do this? Where am I trying to do this? A lot of our viewers cannot get with us on Mondays and Thursdays on the evenings that we're on to do the live sessions. And so now we're giving a little time on Saturday evenings to come on and do a wrap up, basically talk about what it is that to go over some of the things that we've talked about here on Erudition over the last week. We do this because, again, I want people to be engaged and interactive and involved. That doesn't mean that every Saturday that we will be able to see everybody, or that we're able to everybody's still able to come on, but it's just to give another opportunity at the end of the week to allow people who would love to be a part of the conversation the opportunity to come on and give their comments on some things, and to re-engage on the history that we covered during the week. Now, this past week, Tina on her show on Adroit Living, she talked about diabetes. She talked about how it's affecting African Americans. She actually talked about a lot more too. And if you go back and you look at her session for this week, you'll see that she talked about a lot of the health issues, the psychological ramifications of those issues, how it affects Black men, how it affects Black women, their wives, spouses, and even their children, and how these things can be prevented, and we could avoid those things, and also how to use methods to prevent yourself from having these problems, for surviving if you already have the problems, and resources that can help you. It was a very engaging program this week. Hold on, I'm just sending this out. Engaging program this week that I think you really should go back and look at. For the Black History Interactive, I had my sons on this past week, and we talked about the issues that we have with drivers and misrepresentation, as far as it goes with history, and how that affects the understanding of our young people and our communities. It was an engaging program again. I have had my sons on in quite a while, so it was actually really good to have them on to participate in the program. We spend a lot of time here on Erudition trying to engage folks to really understand the importance of your history. And I know many times it becomes tedious at best. I think some of us, we look at it and we say to ourselves, is why is it that they're pushing this so hard, and why is it important? I don't have time for it. Whatever your perception is, but what we're seeing across the nation, and I say this, I find myself repeating this every week. What we're finding is the importance of this is so crucial. Um, we're not getting this information. Your kids aren't getting this information from the schools. We're not getting this information in the way that maybe we did. People of my generation received it. You know, tonight I'm gonna give you a little bit of a story. When I was I almost got into the Lion King when I was a young warthog, but when I was a young man going to school, I did not realize how blessed I was, and that I was blessed to have Black teachers, African American teachers, male and female, who stressed the importance to me, even though as a young child in second and third grade, I may not have understood, I may not have really gotten how important it was to learn these things. They pushed these things to us. We learned about different people in Black history. It became a common thing. We had their pictures up, and I'm not talking about the generic pictures of Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman and different individuals. No, or Martin Luther King Jr. or Malcolm X. I'm talking about a lot of different people that we had on our boards and around us, and we had to write papers on these people, and we had to have a better understanding of what it was we were looking at. You know, I remember the first time I saw the famous tennis player Arthur Ashe. I thought this guy, you know, I was first getting my glasses too, and I thought, oh man, this guy looks like a nerd, right? And then I had to write a report on him, and I remembered how important Arthur Ashe was to the game of tennis, right? Being a excellent tennis player and making a name for himself in the 70s, right? Within my childhood. And it's so important to remember these people and what they had to go through. And then reading about him, I got to learn about the great African-American tennis player, Althea Gibson, who is also forgotten in history. We look at a lot of Venus and Serena, but we need to remember on whose shoulders they stand on. We need to remember how important that they were to the game. Because without the Althea Gibsons, without the Arthur Ashes, they would not have been able to do what they have done. I remember finding out about Benjamin Banneker and having to write a paper on Benjamin Banneker and understanding how much of a genius this man was as an architect, as an engineer. How we praised Benjamin Franklin, but we were never really taught about how Benjamin Banneker was an inspiration for Benjamin Franklin, and how he considered Benjamin Banneker to be this genius. Benjamin Banneker's almanac was more accurate than the ones created by Benjamin Franklin, which initially won him fame. We were blessed as young children coming directly out of the civil rights era to have to know these people. Over this last week, for the wrap up, I sat down and I asked the boys, I gave them two pictures of people who I knew they probably didn't know. But I asked them these questions because I wanted to show the misrepresentation of history. And I want you to go back and watch that episode if you haven't watched it. because it's so important to know who a lot of these people are. One of the first ones that I showed them was this man here. And I asked them who this was, right? And they didn't know. As a matter of fact, when I initially asked, hey, Dad, good to see you. Thanks, Dad. Good to see you. This is just our wrap up. I'm starting to try to do this on Saturday nights for people who can't catch us on Thursdays. There are a lot of people who send me messages saying, man, I would love to be able to interact with you live, but I'm busy or I'm running around during the week. And I understand that. And so this just gives us an opportunity to go back and look at these things again and talk about these issues. But this individual here, I asked him, and it was so funny because my son, I asked him, and he was like, well, I look like a white guy. And they didn't know who Walter White is. And when I gave them the name, they even laughed even harder because Walter White does look like a white man. But Walter White was born in 1893 in Atlanta. His father and his family had an interaction in Atlanta around 1906 in the 1906 Atlanta race riots, where Walter White's father told him that to be ready with his gun and to not fire until people came onto their lawn. And when they did fire, make sure you do not miss. And this stayed with Walter White throughout his life. So Walter White became a leader in the NAACP. Walter White was the mentor of Thurgood Marshall. Without Walter White, we would not have Brown, the victory of Brown versus the Board of Education, because Walter White was able to do things because he looked white. He was able to challenge some of the systems. He understood he could go into places where other blacks could not go. He wrote a very famous book called The Fire and the Flint. It was initially called The Fire and the Faggot, but for what we know, how they changed things because of the way that the grammatical is. But so you may find it under both different names. It was written in 1924. But he wrote these books that were about lynchings. Walter White could go into places while people or after people who have done lynchings, and he could talk to white people about the massacres. He could talk to them as if he were a white man. And they were very deliberate and very, very open with him. And he could get details about the lynchings that other people could not get. And people would say, well, that's sick. But without his efforts, without these things that he did, we wouldn't know a lot of the things, the deeper roots of what was going on. I appreciate Walter White, but his name, his emphasis, his influence on W.B. Du Bois, his influence on Mary McLeod Bethune, on Thurgood Marshall, on James Weldon Johnson, the man who wrote the Black National Anthem. This is all lost to us. His influence with A. Philip Randolph, right? Who eventually helped to form and create the March on Washington in 1963, who initially wanted to do a March on Washington all the way back in the early 30s. We would not know all of these people. They would not have been as successful without someone like Walter White. And he is someone that we should remember from our history. And so talking to my sons and giving them something to look at and not just see a white man is something that we try to do even again on this program. And as I do these wrap-ups, I want you to go back and watch the episodes, but I also want to retouch and reemphasize to you the importance of this history and why we need to know it. Another thing that we talked about this past week was the misrepresentation. You know, I have friends who write and who teach all over. And one of the biggest issues that we have is trying to teach history in its truth, in its reality, without any made up emphasis. We want you to go and be able to study, whether it be world history, whether it be Black history, whether it be biblical history. It is a challenge to teach this, but it is so important that we know it, that we grow from it. I gave the boys another picture this past week that was, again, a misrepresentation and goes out almost every year. I've seen this picture several times over the last few years. And unfortunately, even this Black History Month, this right here, Theo Money Ain't a Thing, James. And I asked the boys, who was this? And looking at that picture, could they tell me who this man was? Because his name definitely ain't Theo James. But unfortunately, this is what was put out by people. The actual person in this picture is Marcus Mosiah Garvey. Marcus Garvey. And because we are so challenged and thinking things are so funny, we put down on this man's picture, the first Black man to make it rain. It's so disingenuous. It's so obsequious. We don't talk about that he was the founder of the Universal Negro Improvement Association or the African Communities League, or that he tried to teach Black people as a Black man that they have others in the world, not just in America. To teach the Pan-African understanding that we are all part of the diaspora and that there are Blacks who would welcome them in Africa, specifically Liberia. There were Jamaicans, and there are people in South America who understood that we are more than just one group of people struggling in a country that was not treating us right. But we are putting things on him that he's a man that makes it rain. We ignore the fact that that Garvey has died, Malcolm X's father being one of them, were killed by the Klan, and that the federal government got involved along with some Black folks, eclectic Black folks, who joined in to try to get this man removed and defamed in the country by calling him a crook, by saying he was ripping people off, by subverting his message. We forget all of that because we're told that his name is Theo Money Ain't a Thing James. In a world where our kids aren't even being taught Black history properly, in a country that is fighting them to even be able to learn Black history. My son said, they don't show us the pictures of these people. We recognize the names, but we don't know the faces. And that's done on purpose. And if they do say the names, they do it in passing. The last picture that I showed them when we had our episode on Thursday was of this man. And again, they could not tell me, and my kids get history all the time. From looking at his face, they could not tell me immediately who this was. And it goes again to show you how we are teaching history in a way where it is short-term memory and it's gone. It's gone. And when I told them that this is a picture of Carter G. Woodson, which if we did not have a Carter G. Woodson, we probably wouldn't have a Black History Month. Because Carter G. Woodson is the father of Black History Day and Black History Week. If we did not have this man here who they don't recognize, who again was one of the few Black men to graduate out of Harvard, first being W.B. Du Bois, a man who sat around and wrote books and put out bulletins, the Journal of Negro History in 1916, Negro History Bulletin they put out in 1937. He taught at Howard University. He's one of the most intelligent Black men of the 20th century. But if we're not taught about him, other than just a passing name, he wasn't an entertainer. He wasn't a musician. He was an intellectual and a scholar who understood that teaching our history to our young people is so important because it shapes who they will be and who they can become. All of this is important. All of this is important and very often ignored. So when I do these wrap-ups during the end of the week, that I have decided, or I should better say led to do, it doesn't matter to me how many people join us on the wrap-up, but I got to give the opportunity for those who cannot catch us during the week and emphasize to you the importance of joining us when you can, of striking the conversation, of revisiting and looking at these faces like the ones I just showed you. It's informative that our children can't tell you who Walter White is, who Thurgood Marshall is, who a lot of these different people are. And if they saw their face right in front of them, couldn't tell you who they were. But the same can't be said of pictures of Abraham Lincoln, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin. The same can't be said of people who have oppressed us, like Andrew Jackson, like Woodrow Wilson, or those who defamed our mothers and sisters, like Ronald Reagan. They know those faces. They can tell you stories about them. But when asked about people in our own community, when asked who Richard Allen was, they don't know. When asked who Marian Anderson was, they don't know. When challenged with the idea of reading and understanding the importance of a Amari Baraka or James Baldwin, they don't know. You know, it's something that we have to start to understand in our homes and in our school. In the media recently, there was a story about Bethune-Cookman College. And as we were watching about the facilities and how bad the facilities were and how bad and all of the stuff about the football and the way the school looked, I asked my sons, who was Mary McLeod Bethune? And they didn't know. Mary McLeod Bethune is very important because during the time of the Depression and the issue of the New Deal, Mary McLeod Bethune was one of the people who had the ear of the President of the United States, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, to be able to finance and help schools and help Black charities, and to use Eleanor Roosevelt to better assist the Black communities during the time of the Depression and during the time just before World War II. We don't teach our history at home, and so they don't learn it at school. And the only history that I consistently hear from young people, and I have to look at my kids, they can tell me any entertainer of the last 25 years, rapper, musician, some sports folks, people who probably have done nothing to really help them, but they put those names. We were talking the other day about Charles Drew, because his name came up in a game that I was playing with my kids. And again, we're not talking about celebrities. We're talking about medical doctors who made a difference, like Dr. Drew. Right? The invention of plasma, of everything that you use right now whenever you need blood. But those names are lost to us. And so, what am I saying tonight in this wrap up? What we tried to cover this week was the misrepresentation of history, the exclusion of history. We tried to open up the aperture. My wife tried to talk to folks about what is going on in the world for Black people as far as disease, and how those diseases are affecting us. Diabetes predominantly is what she spoke about. Those things are hurting us in our society. She gave you graphics. It was an outstanding show. And I challenge you to go back. Just as history is important, it is so important that you understand how to live a healthy mental and physical life. I asked Tina about a year ago now to come on and share her knowledge, as she has been very, very dedicated to doing that. When you consider the fact that 37.3 million people have diabetes, and more Americans are getting it every year. And African Americans lead those numbers. And a lot of them die, and 8.5 going undiagnosed. And majority of that is diagnosed due to death. These are important conversations to have, because we're not having them in our churches, in our social clubs, on our posts, street posts, on our neighborhood steps, and our cookouts and our get-togethers, and our Christmas parties, Thanksgiving holiday get-togethers, birthdays. When I was a kid, every time we would get together, my sisters, we talk about it. We would sing, my siblings and cousins would sing gospel songs. We recite poems and all of this stuff. And everybody had the opportunity, especially with my Auntie Mary, to come down and provide something to the family, not just to sit there and eat. To grow the wealth of knowledge in our family. to have discussions, to learn our history, to know who we are. I know that it doesn't get fun, and I know me coming on some of these sessions, I laugh sometimes because what I'll see sometimes is my numbers will ramp up and then they'll drop down. They're like, oh, that's not what I want to see. But we need this so much. We need this so much. If we do not do something about where we are, and if you're on here tonight, a few that are on here, and you didn't get a chance to participate in the sessions this week, and you have a question, feel free before I get ready to go off of here to drop your question. It doesn't matter what you're asking about. We are an organization and a network that is founded on the idea of answering questions, of providing knowledge, providing understanding. That is the goal of Erudition. That is the goal. My sons will be coming on to do we're adding another show to the mix. My two oldest sons will be coming on this next week, and they will have a show that they will run and occasionally have their younger brothers on with to hit things from a youth perspective and to provide you knowledge and understanding as they see it, as they learn, as they grow. We want to do more to allow people to be included, to grow, because that's the only thing that really, really worries me. People are going to find what they're going to do. Some folks are going to go to religion, some are not. But the knowledge that we have, the understanding that we have is failing. It's failing. And far too many of us, as we tried to cover this week, are comfortable with it. We're okay with it. And that's a problem. Because being okay with it is not helping us as a people. We're not learning. Being okay with it. We're making heroes of liars. We're emphasizing mistruth. We're teaching the things that we should not teach, and we're doing it comfortably. We're confusing. And unfortunately, it's just become something of a thing where we're so okay with it, we don't even want to change it anymore. That's the fight. That's the everyday fight that I'm waging as I go through and I do things here on Erudition. I'm not going to trouble you all too much longer. If you have a question, comment, suggestion for the network, please drop that in chat. If you're on with us, I am open to anything that you would want to discuss or you want us to discuss in the next week. Because I am taking this so much more seriously than I think I did when I first started this network, because I'm seeing things that are affecting us, that if we don't get better, we're not going to be able to reclaim some of the people out here. We're not going to get everybody anyway, but a lot of people are perishing for lack of knowledge. They want knowledge, but they can't find it. They're not getting it. They're not getting it. So if you have anything, I will gladly be open to discussing it. I'm looking through some of my messages that I got throughout the week. Someone asked me, how do I know that others didn't arrive in America before Africans? I didn't say that I know that. What I will say is this, is that if you go back and you look through the years before and you look at the evidence, right? And if you judge the evidence by sourced, highly dependable, medium, maybe there's some evidence that is there. We know that the Black African Phoenicians, this is for the person who sent this to me in chat, that they sailed to the Americas. We know that because of the likenesses of the sculptures, like the one that's sitting here on my desk. Move my mic, right? We know that from the materials that they left. We know that they went to Britain because they had ports in Britain. So we know that there are high and moderate evidence that these people were here. So I'm going to put a link for the person to go in and read. Where's my book at? Go and get They Came Before Columbus by Ivan Van Sertima, and read that book and come back and we'll talk about those things on the show. Feel free to come and talk about it. Janera, she said you had a question here. Let me see. All right, the history of the Democrats and Black people. So here's the thing with that. If you were to go, there's a great book that Janera, I don't know if you've ever read it. It's by what's that cat's name? Earl Ofari Hutchinson. It's a great book. I think you could probably even get it for free now. It's called Betrayed, and it's the history of presidential failures to protect Black lives. And I think it's one of the better books to go read, because what he tries to walk you through is how these things happened, how we got caught up in the Democratic Party. Because in the end of the day, if you also go and read Malcolm X's The Ballad of the Bullet, Malcolm tries to tell you that neither party is really dependable. Neither party, whether you call one a fox or you call the other one a wolf, they both will devour you. They both are not here to help you. They are here to purge and eat upon the sheep. And when you look at those parties and you understand that both parties, though the Democratic Party has more Black faces in it than, say, the Republican Party, in the high echelon areas of those parties, it is typically a white man that sits a position. When you look at going all the way back to the more modern era, when you go look at Harding, President Harding, who said that he would be for Black folks and said that he was going to open up the gates and do things for Black people. And James Weldon Johnson, who is known for writing the Black National Anthem, Lift Every Voice and Sing, was the field secretary for the NAACP. And you can actually go online, and I think I will put that in the link, and you can look at James Weldon Johnson's letters back and forth to these presidents, how they tried to speak to Harding, to Coolidge, to Roosevelt, to Truman, to Eisenhower, how even going into the Kennedy years, when Kennedy's own father told him, don't lean toward them Negroes. That's a death trap. It is amazing to me how bad it is. When you look at Lyndon Johnson, who pushed a lot of civil rights legislation and probably was the most important person presidential-wise to get Black people to sign themselves over to the Democratic Party. Not Kennedy. Kennedy was dead. Kennedy had been shot and killed. The memory of Kennedy, the martyrdom, as you may call it, pushed a lot of people to say, well, we got to do this for Kennedy. And Johnson used that to gain a footing. And he signed a lot of civil rights legislation. But at the same time, as they were wrapping up the Vietnam War, they were sending Black bodies before anybody else over to them jungles. And Johnson wasn't stopping that. And even though he said we shall overcome in his famous speech, and he got a tear from Dr. King, he turned on the members of the civil rights movement, specifically Dr. King, when they called out the fact that we shouldn't be over there fighting this war. Well, Muhammad Ali said that they didn't do anything to me. When brothers was getting beaten, harassed, and locked up on the street, when the Black Panther Party was being shot in their field houses, when drugs was rampaging through our communities, Johnson didn't stop any of that. When brothers was coming back addicted to heroin, cocaine, finding ways to ship that poison from overseas to America, and destroying our neighborhoods and our culture, so that when the next president came in, that was a Republican, Richard Nixon said, let's use deadly force. It's a war on drugs. So when I look at the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, I have to look at beyond the politics, the social dynamic on how they enforced what they were doing, how that the president and the Speaker of the House and the different parties could give each other a high five and keep the things moving. When you watch or read or listen to Malcolm X's The Ballad of the Bullet in 1964, and Malcolm is telling you that this racism makes them crazy and you can't trust any of them. When Dr. King, in his last book, wrote this very important fact, and I'm looking back here to see if my book is sitting on my, but he made a very important fact here. Just because you don't want to kill me does not mean you see me as an equal. Does not mean you want my kids to compete with your kids or me to compete with you on the job. You just want to keep your Christian mentality that, well, at least I didn't kill him. And until we understand that even CRT, yes, CRT, critical race theory, this thing that is the boogeyman, that has become the boogeyman for everybody over the last few years. And folks forget that one of the major components of CRT is a challenge to liberalism. They forget that part because, see, that is not what people want you to know. I'm not even talking about those on the more liberal Democratic side. See, nobody wants to be challenged. They will say that they are activists. They will say that they are for you, but nobody is really looking to be challenged. It is the reason why we are having the problems that we're having, why we're losing so many of the hard-fought, died-for rights. how we are taking a step back. People don't remember what I talked to earlier during the wrap up about Thurgood Marshall. People don't remember that Thurgood Marshall was hunted down. They used to call him Mr. Civil Rights. And when they were challenging Plessy versus Ferguson with the case for Brown versus the Board of Education, how white folks wanted him dead. His name was everywhere. But they fought for that. They got it. And it was an attempt to reverse racism. But here's the thing that we often forget. The fact is that if something wanted to be reversed in this country, we have a two-party system, basically. The Democrats and the Republicans can change anything if just some of them agree with the other. And nothing gets changed if some of them don't agree with the other. So what I'm saying there is, if you wanted to stop, let's think about how long it took to pass the anti-lynching bill. No matter how you called it, Emmett Till bill, whatever you called it, the Dwyer bill, it took forever to pass it. Generations. Because it wasn't something that people really wanted passed. Specifically, whites. When you see people agree on policies, they lie. Because there's something in that act or in that bill that they want. But the idea of the benefit of Black people is almost often entirely not on their primary agenda. That's not something that it's really based on. So when you ask about the Democratic Party, I would say go get Errol Fari Hutchinson's book, Betrayed. Great book. Keep it in your library and do some reading on. I think that's a beginning start for you if you really want to get more into the idea of why we are so fixated on that party, even in our state politics and our federal politics. Some of it is Roosevelt, right? Got us into it. And then, but the majority of it happened after the Johnson years. And it has affixed us. But people need to remember that wasn't, Johnson didn't support all of us. He also himself had racial issues, even though he helped to pass a lot of bills. Go read about Fannie Lou Hamer and how they tried to take Black delegates to the Democratic convention and they were turned away. And how Johnson, when Fannie Lou Hamer made her declaration and her plea that they should be included, Johnson preempted her on live television by saying he had a presidential announcement to make that was really nothing, just to block her off of network television. And he failed because all it really did was they recorded it and played it the next night. So more people were able to see it than they may have caught it during her live speech. All of these are parts of that history. I'm glad you asked that question. Well, we got 10 more minutes here. I usually don't try to make these wrap-ups an hour, but I'm here for you if you have questions, as always, for this network. But I know the hour gets late. It's almost 9 o'clock in Chicago. But I'm here for you for the next 10 minutes to discuss whatever you want to talk about, whatever comes to your mind, whatever history you want to go into, any suggestions that I can make towards you to help you have a better understanding of Black history. And I would encourage you to join us or watch some of the old broadcasts from the week as we get ready to go into this next week. And to share them. Share and subscribe. Subscribe on YouTube, our YouTube channel, or like us on Facebook. Share it with your family, your friends, heck, even your enemies. Don't care. Let's get the word out here that we are here every week trying to reach folks where they need to be reached. If you all don't have any other questions, I can get on off of here and let you go ahead and enjoy the rest of your Saturday night. But I'll give you a moment if you have any other questions, comments, concerns, issues. We need to delve into our role historically on today's society. In what way? What do you mean? Are you talking about what we have provided this current society? How we've gotten to where we are right now? I'm trying to understand where you're coming from with that. How we shaped it. So a couple of weeks ago, maybe 2 weeks ago, I talked about how, and I took my cue from Dr. Du Bois's book. If you've ever read The Gift of Black Folks, he gives you a very unique perspective on how Blacks, African Americans, Black Americans have affected so many parts of the United States. That's from how we work, right? By work hours, how places were discovered, how we acquired the states that we have. I talked to you about how the Haitian Revolution pushed the idea of the Louisiana Purchase that everybody credits to Thomas Jefferson, when really what it was is Napoleon's desire that they had to pay for their war debts, and the fact that they had been pushed out of Haiti, both them and the British, and giving up that land and understanding that they needed to focus other parts of their empire. Talked about the explorers that came out of that helped to get Lewis and Clark and different individuals to the other side of this nation. We talked about Black soldiers and their importance on how they helped to define patriotism in America, how they shaped it, how they guided the idea of what is really freedom. I talked to you about how democracy before the African American, the Black American, was really about privilege. The king would allow privilege to whoever was wealthy to have a position as a duke or earl or whatever, and you were given privilege over land. But democracy changed. The idea of it changed with the enslavement of Black people, because then democracy became about being treated fairly, equally, being able to participate in the government, and how, to some extent, the idea of privilege for a lot of white Americans has pretty much stayed the same, and that Blacks don't look at emancipation or freedom. That's democracy to them, the ability to be able, a part of society, to work hard, to gain, that's how we see it, where others see it as privilege. I have the right to do what I want. The reconstruction of freedom is important because our ancestors helped to define what freedom really meant to the world. The idea of women's freedom came from Blacks. White women did not have the ability to own property, to vote, until the passing of amendments, to the changing of the Constitution that allowed the idea and the follow-through to allow women the right to vote. How the civil rights movement changed the ability from white men to even discriminate against women as a sex. Our music, how our music shaped what they call folk music, gospel, country, R&B. How we have shaped it, how our music is still important to this day. I just told my son earlier When our rappers rap negatively and don't understand the power in Black voices and in Black music that has pushed this country, how important the jazz era was to the soldiers who were returning back from world wars, how it kept them inspired and and encouraged, how they called it juke music, Negro music, but they listened to it, they emulated it, they wanted to be a part of it, the culture. Even as we got into the blues, even as we get into R&B, into rock, the English people who will go over and get records, right, from obscure blues singers of the early 20th century, Howlin' Wolf and different individuals, and they would emulate these songs. These same white men who are now in what they call the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, the Country Music Hall of Fame, and all they did was emulate the American folk music and songs from the African American slave who cried out in those fields from can't see to can't see, who had the ear of God, who eventually delivered them. As John Brown said, as Frederick Douglass talked about the feeling you could get from listening to those slaves call out and sing. Later on, listening to the guys on the Chain Gang, or even before that, listening to the guys who built the Transcontinental Railroad, to the sound of Black voices, hammering those spikes into the railroad and creating those tracks that took us across this great nation. The art and the literature, the Phyllis Wheatley during the Revolutionary War, Langston Hughes giving a voice to Black struggle, Dunbar, and we could go on and on. The gift of the Spirit, how the Black church became one of the most powerful organizations in the history of this nation to change the civil understanding for people by pulling folks to understand that the God that we should all serve is not respect of person. So when we say shaped historically, I'm giving you the general, 100-mile up looking down view. But we have done so many things. Industry with our inventions. And so this is why our history is so important. This is why I do these shows. This is why I'm now trying to do this later show so that people can catch up, that you can hopefully get something. And you can gain something, because it's not just about what I'm telling you. It's the knowledge. Reading those books. Go read some Du Bois. Go look up those people who I talked about earlier. And let's not give them a misrepresentation. Let's not call them the things that we've been calling them and putting out here phony. Let's not go back to the Theo money ain't a thing, James. Let's not continually push this trash. Know who Marcus Garvey is or was. Join programs like this and others that try to teach you. Go out and get books like Biblically Black and Blessed and learn the biblical side of it. Biblical Black and Blessed and Biblically Black and Blessed too. Get on Mondays and listen to Tina, or go watch the replays and understand what we should have learned about how to better take care of ourselves mentally, because all Black people are still struggling with some form of PTSD. We're all still in survival mode that teaches us from being able to love, and then not being able to love, not being able to understand. And when we cannot understand, then we cannot learn. Jadaris, I hope that helped. I hope that you all, the 5 that I see on here, you all got something from this wrap up. Please go back and watch those episodes on Erudition. Subscribe, like, and enjoy. Watch Tina's program. Please support my sons as they start their new show here on Wednesday. Time will be put out. We'll advertise the time, and they'll be on. But we're trying to push more and more learning here. But I'm not going to belabor you guys. It's been an hour. I usually don't do this show for an hour. I usually try to do 30 minutes to 40 minutes on the wrap up. But we got into some good conversation. I do appreciate you, Janarius, for joining us. And my dad, I saw you on here. Dad, I appreciate you for joining us. I'll give you a call later. I know we haven't talked over the last couple of days. I saw Pastor Razor gave us a like. I saw Eric was on here. Thank you all. Thank you all for joining us tonight. My son's going to get mad because I didn't put a banner up here. You can also help us out. We have a Cash App. Whatever you send is appreciated. You can Cash App that to the Erudition Network. It would be greatly received. That's things we use for our equipment and how we pay for some of our streaming abilities. But until the next time, until next week, you all have a blessed rest of your Saturday evening. Get some rest if you need to. And we will be seeing you again next week. Thank you. Thank you.